Now, my name is Larry Blumenfeld. I met that guy over there. Terence Blanchard had a full head of hair at the time. He had no gray.
None.
He was composing the score for Spike Lee's Malcolm X, which he later turned into a very fine jazz album as well. And you probably know much of the story from there on in as one of the most influential trumpeters, composers, band leaders, and educators in the jazz world, but also an artist who's working on a much larger landscape, including recently the Met Opera premiere of his opera, which was the first Met Opera presentation of an opera composed by a black composer. And of course, Terence's next opera at the Met Champion opens April 10th. Terence was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, where he still lives now. Sacha Jenkins I met when I had about half a head of hair. We were together in something called the National Arts Journalism Program at Columbia University. Sacha was born and raised in Astoria, Queens, where hip-hop and when hip-hop was ascendant. As a teenager, he founded a zine devoted to graffiti art and the first ever hip-hop newspaper. From there, he moved on to Vibe magazine. From there, he's done quite another broad landscape of things, including films about the seminal hip-hop group Wu-Tang Clan and Rick James. And according to your bio, Sacha Jenkins' band, the 1865, was the first punk band to play outdoors on the grounds of Lincoln Center. And this event is an early salvo in See Me As I Am, Lincoln Center's year-long multidisciplinary celebration of Terence Blanchard, which I think honors the range of a singular artist, but also suggests what creative artists like Sacha and Terence are doing, which are breaking down the walls between the things that used to separate the buildings at Lincoln Center. So all year long, stay in touch and you can find out more about what they're doing regarding Terence Blanchard. So I did, and I've written about these guys, the Wall Street Journal, the Village Voice when it existed, and recently I did a piece about this film where I interviewed Sacha for Daily Beast. So let me start where we started there, Sacha. When you took up this project, what did you know about Louis Armstrong, and what was your impression of Louis Armstrong?
I mean, growing up in Queens, I knew that there was a school named after him. I knew he lived there. I knew his house was there. I knew the hits. Hip hop, and lots of other music was my main music, and Armstrong wasn't my main music per se. And coming of age during the age of hip hop, his mannerisms and how he conducted himself, from what I was told, not even from what I fully understood, really didn't jive with where I was at that time in my life. So I don't want to say I completely wrote him off, but I pretty much wrote him off.
Right.
So then when I got the phone call, I was like, all right, let me, take some time out to do some research. And they had already done about 2 years worth of research, so they just dumped a bunch of stuff in my lap. And I was like, this guy's the coolest person ever. And you make a film about Wu-Tang, you make a film about Rick James, you make a film about Louis Armstrong, you realize that, like, when it comes to black music, there are no genres, right? I think music are markers of particular times, but the Rick James story is similar to the Louis Armstrong story, which is similar to the RZA from Wu-Tang story. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm telling the same story over and over again. And it's always, the music is a reflection of and a reaction to the environment, of the American environment, and who we are in America and how we react to that. So, I got asked, like, was it strange for you to do Louis Armstrong? And so, no. And when I told Nas I was making the film, he says to me, did you know that Louis Armstrong is my favorite artist? And so I said, well, you've got to be the voice of Armstrong. And so when he finally saw the film, and Wonderful World is like his favorite song, and he's like me. He's talking about the block. I was like, I told you, he's the same.
Right.
It's the same thing, So I don't know if I answered your question, but
You did and more, but it's not weird that Nas said that. Nas's dad, Oludara, when he plays cornet, he's one of the few people on the planet who can get a Louis Armstrong sound out of it. Now, he plays very different kind of music, but that sound that he gets is very old. So now I remember I went to the Louis Armstrong House Museum in Queens, which, if you've never been, you're in New York, why would you not do that? This is one of the great American shrines, but as you found out, one of the great troves of information. So I went there years ago with a trumpeter from New Orleans, Kermit Ruffins, who's a little younger than you, but when I brought Kermit there, he was like, yeah, growing up, where I grew up in New Orleans, we were listening to the Commodores and Michael Jackson, and we didn't want to hear about Louis Armstrong. Terence, when you were growing up, and when you were young, just picking up the trumpet, what did Louis Armstrong represent to you then?
Something we didn't want to deal with, because for us it was Miles Davis, Clifford Brown, Freddie Hubbard, Woody Shaw, Dizzy Gillespie. But it took me to join Art Blakey's band to have my head turned around because, being in that band, I looked at Art Blakey as being one of the biggest renegades in the music
And
world.
you're what, like 18, 19?
I was 19 years old. And he started talking about Pops. And I was like, wait a minute, who? And it made me go back and really do some work and do some research. And next thing you know, I'm hanging with Dizzy, and Dizzy starts talking about Pops. And then while on tour with Art Blakey, we played a club in San Francisco called the Keystone Corner. And in the back in the dressing room, there used to be this huge photo of Pops and Miles. And Pops is looking straight ahead with a very stern look on his face. And Miles is looking up at Pops smiling like a little kid. And that solidified it for me. I went, wow, I've misjudged this thing the entire time. And basically what it was the Hello Dolly stuff.
Right.
When we saw that, we didn't.
We grew up, we're about the same age. You saw him on The Tonight Show holding the handkerchief.
Yeah, but it was a Hello Dolly more so than anything. Is when we saw that, we saw it out of context.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like you don't understand what it took for him to get there. And one of the things about this documentary I'm so glad that Sacha made, what it revealed to me was, some of us want to be, rebels verbally. We some of us get out there and make a lot of noise with what it is we're speaking about. But the thing that I've noticed in this documentary, especially when you see the Danny Kaye scene, right? What's the revolution is the music. You know what I mean? Pops put that music on such a high level, nobody could touch that. If we always used to talk about it, just go listen to Strutting with Some Barbecue or the trumpet introduction to West End Blues. There are people who still can't play that stuff, And Pops played that with ease. And there was one story, in the jazz world, when you play the blues, it's a very common form of improvisation that we all know, And the little known secret that nobody wants to talk about, we generally always play it in two different keys, either F or B flat, right? So everybody works on that stuff to be able to show everybody up, playing in F or B flat, right? So you wait for that moment to shine. You at the jam session, you're gonna jump up there and play everything you worked on, or either F or B, whatever the key is. And Pops talked about this one guy who wanted to come up there and play with them, and he jumped up there and he said, that fella didn't know we was playing in B. So every key he hit was wrong. But just the idea of that, that's the level of musicianship that Pops was dealing with. And I think the lesson for me was know which battle to fight. Know which battle to fight. If Pops would have been what we wanted him to be, we probably wouldn't know him. We probably wouldn't have any of this music.
Right.
You know what I mean? But the mere fact that he played that game, but set that bar high musically. Listen, man, all of the Bing Crosby and Boo Boo Boo, all of those people, they were trying to imitate him. Think about that.
And Bing Crosby he admitted that.
Right, and imitate his vocal styles, not him playing the trumpet.
Billie Holiday also.
Style. Yeah, and I think, for me, I'm happy that Sacha put this out there for for all of these other young kids to see, to understand that, sometimes you got to go behind the curtain and really understand what it took for this man to do what he did. And we're all grateful and we're the beneficiaries of it, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here. That's for damn sure. I know that. I mean, because when you talk about Kermit Ruffin, and you talk about some of these other young trumpet players, including myself, it blew me away to think about all of these young trumpet players in New Orleans who play Louis Armstrong licks and don't even know they're Louis Armstrong licks.
Right.
That's the type of impact this man has had on music, that it's lasted throughout these generations and has still been the DNA of a lot of creative music from that area of the country.
Sacha, when you started digging in, making this film, were there any one or two like aha moments of, okay, now I get it. This is who. Now I've really stumbled on who Louis Armstrong was.
Well, the information is in the playing. I was always as a kid, I was a huge Jimi Hendrix fan. And there's always hubbub about how he played the Star Spangled Banner at Woodstock. And then when I heard how he played the Star Spangled Banner and the information that's inside of that, and that Baldwin picked up on that, it just made me realize that like it's not always verbal, it's not always physical action. Music is such a powerful medium, and through that I realized, like, wow, I've always wanted to make the Hendrix film, and it'll probably never happen because his estate is no comment. But I realized, I was like, wait a minute, I did the Armstrong film. He did everything before everybody, and was the man. Like, I can't name anyone in who is. Someone told me Paul Robeson. Roberson was, a major talent who could do it all.
Major talent,
right?
And major activist and major
Right.
major figure. But I don't think, that moment, the segment with the Star Spangled Banner in the film is so touching and moving. And it's also like when Louis Armstrong played that, it was as radical
Right.
as when Jimi Hendrix did that. And when Louis Armstrong played those, it's like you could go anywhere in the world, per person of any age, play those first 30 seconds of West End blues. That's like an announcement of a new world. And it's just as potent. It's like, so you could hear Stravinsky's Rite of Spring today, and it seems radical. Those 30 seconds are as powerful and radical as ever. So, now, Terence, it's funny, I've written about you, followed you, scoring stories, writing, composing for stories, and then there was this moment in 2006, 2007, where you composed a score that was kind of a soundtrack for what you lived through after the levees failed and after the floods that followed the hurricane and the levee failures. And that was intense. But now here you had this, I can't think for a trumpeter from New Orleans to have to score a film about Louis Armstrong. Yeah. How did that conversation, because first of all, you've got all this Louis music. How did the conversation about what was going to happen musically happen between the two of you, or how did that work?
Well, this gentleman said it's Satchmo. I'm not competing with him. How do I serve the story? How do I complement it? And I think it's complemented beautifully. It's seamless. It has its own identity and it doesn't step on what's out there. So I think he did an amazing job.
Thank you. But thank you. I think the worst thing I could have done was to try to play the trumpet. The score. No, seriously. Because first of all, who wants to take away from or try to compete with Louis Armstrong? There's no need to do that. I think what I wanted the music to be was the heartfelt side of what we all, well, I hope I explain this the right way. The heartfelt side of like people like myself who misjudged him. You know what I'm saying? Who got it wrong, but now had a chance to get it right. And I wanted to create music that would be a beautiful backdrop, the emotional backdrop to what it was that he was going through. When he talks about being put in a boys' home with the pistol, when he talks about the dude who said, "I can't introduce that nigga." Yeah. Just all of those all of those things that he went through, the indignity of all of it, man, you know, and to come out of it, the person that he was, you know, which gave us all of this beautiful music, but not just the music, but he set the table for this style of music to be viewed a certain way by everybody around the world. You know what I mean? That's the thing that I feel very blessed about being a part of. One of the reasons why I feel blessed about being a part of this is because I got a chance to kind of like say thank you to Pops in my own way by writing this score in a way that doesn't compete or try to even come close to playing music from the period. There's enough of that already in the documentary, and there's no need for me to either do that because I was worried it would make a mockery of what it was that he did. And I wanted to go totally the opposite way and create something that was an emotional backdrop, which allowed people to reflect on his words. You know, because I was just talking to Sacha before we walked out, and I said, that's the thing about this documentary for me that I love, because, you know, we always used to hear about Pops being socially conscious, but it was like folklore, you know what I mean? But to actually see this and hear it, you know, it's just like confirmation, and I can't explain to you what it does to me as a person who grew up looking at this gentleman a certain way, you know, and I'm not embarrassed to say that because I think it's important to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's important for us to admit that, you know, we judge this man. And like I said, the music is the revolution. When you listen to not only Strutting with Some Barbecue or Western Blues, go back and listen to some of the Hot 8 stuff. The arrangements themselves, were amazing, right? Some of those arrangements had about 2 bars of improvisation. But what happened in the modern jazz era, they wanted to get rid of that and make it all improvisation. But Pops was really about making a musical statement. And all of those arrangements, man, are even powerful to this day. You know, I think about that all the time. He created the language of jazz. A lot of people start to think that the language of jazz is improvisation. No. That's one aspect.
No, I mean, I think you could argue, and you do in the film, that he authored the phrasing that almost all American music that followed has, you know, including half of what you hear on the radio today, the phrasing of it. So, Terence, when you were studying at NOCA, New Orleans Center for Creative Arts in New Orleans, and Sacha, when you were in school here in Astoria, Queens, you were not presented with this Louis Armstrong.
No.
Not at all. No.
I mean, it wasn't close, man. You know, and that's a shame.
Now, Terence, when you're teaching now, I mean, you're teaching at a higher level, but are you trying to imbue a different...
Oh, of course. Because, you know, I don't want young kids to make the same mistake that I did. You know, I look at it and I go, you know, we have to put everything into context. Everything, you know. Tell me who was playing like that at the time. Name them. You can't. You know, and it's one of those things. Think about this too, and I don't mean to be controversial, but think about this. We live in a country, especially at that time, when anything that was successful from our community, there had to be a white counterpart. Right? So think about that. There were white counterparts, obviously, but can you name them? I mean, Bix Beiderbecke, you know, all those guys, but for the most part, we don't even deal with that music. It's still Pops, right? So that lets you know the power of what it is that he laid before everybody.
And as you display in the film, it's hard to grasp just what a star, an international star, how powerful his presence was. You know, there were not that many, you know, maybe decades later, Muhammad Ali, but there weren't that many Americans in general, and certainly not Black Americans, who had that level of stardom and reach. You know, Terence, you were talking about, you certainly weren't going to play any trumpet. One thing that's really moving, of course, your writing for strings is so compelling, and that's a lot of what makes an opera work, but here, like at the end of this film with the Turtle Island String Quartet, you're evoking, you know, using strings that we wouldn't normally associate with this music to tell that story, and you did the same thing to express the tragedy and rage after the hurricane in New Orleans, and that's
Well, listen, man. Wayne Shorter said something. Tavis Smiley asked him, "What does jazz mean?" And Wayne Shorter said, "Jazz means I dare you." You know, and that's what I thought about when doing this. That he was gracious enough to allow me to try this, to do this. You know what I mean? Because for me, the easiest thing in the world is to try to play some music from the genre.
right.
There's no thought in that. You know, for me, the challenge is like, how do you lay down an emotional bed? Now, what most of you may not even realize is that the theme that I've written is based kind of harmonically off the old rocking chair. Because when I hear old rocking chair, bro, it makes me weep all the time. I don't know what it is about it. There's something about that thing that it just emotionally grabs me. So, you know, some of that harmonic progression is kind of based off of that thing. And I said if there was anything that I was going to take from Pops, I was going to disguise it, you know, in a way that people wouldn't readily be able to make the connection. But there is a connection.
But bring it back to the lack of education on Armstrong, at least for me and people like me, because music education was one of the first things that got cut when New York City was bankrupt when we were in school.
Yep.
That's why hip hop happened. You know, that's why turntables went from being
No instruments in
a
the school.
tool to an instrument. We made this thing an instrument, you know, so it's full circle in many ways. You know, Armstrong playing music in the street with his friends, you know, improvising, you know, this whole scatting thing. It's like, you know, I say there's an Armstrong in every neighborhood. In our neighborhood, it happened to be Nas. He happened to be the guy who had the charisma and the talent and was able to transcend where we came from to go where he went.
And have you found in the communities, the hip hop community that you work in or around, that the presence of Armstrong is acknowledged and the genius of Armstrong is acknowledged?
I think now more people, you know, I think we had a hand in hipping people to him for sure. But I mean, the guy could dress. He's funny as hell. I mean, just who has all of that?
And in some ways in this film, he's gangsta before it was.
Yeah.
You were gangsta. Right?
But even in language, even in the way he speaks,
Yeah.
I mean, just the whole package is just nothing like it.
You talk about gangster. One of my favorite stories about Pops, and I don't know, it's maybe folklore. I don't know. You know, who knows? But I heard it from a lot of sources. You know, Pops used to like his smoke, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he was famous for that. And he was coming through Kennedy Center and the JFK, and Nixon was coming through too on Air Force One. I think he was doing something at the United Nations or something. And they held Pops up at the VIP, you know, thing for immigration. And Nixon comes in and, you know, he's a big fan of Pops, and they start to walk out, and Nixon goes, "Is there anything I could do for you?" And Pops goes, "Yeah, carry this for me." So
I believe it.
I've heard that story from a lot of people. I don't know if it's true or not, but I still love it no matter.
I'm
you
going
know.
to choose to believe it.
Can you imagine just a dog running up to Nixon? That would have been hilarious.
Now, you know, Sacha, in this film, I've heard some people comment that, oh, you've unearthed this Louis Armstrong that we didn't know about, yet the clips he's saying it on TV. He was right out there, and somehow we either erased or forgot.
Well, because, you know, people look at Hello Dolly. You look at things like that and say it's easy to focus on that, you know? I mean, imagine if he was alive now with social media and how things just get. And, you know, we didn't really have control over our images. We didn't have control over how we were perceived and, you know, how we were put out there in the media. So literally he's just out there naked pretty much.
Now, Terence, you know, when as you mentioned, in Blakey's band, all right, you're a teenager and you're very quickly mastering, you know, if not, you would have been out of the band, mastering modern jazz at its highest level, and then composing for that band and figuring out how to write for that situation, and then going on to work with the Herbies and Waynes of the world. What was it like, or what did you have to do to adapt your talent to writing for film in this way and the way you have for so many years? Was it very different?
It was very different because, writing music for yourself, it's all about you telling your story. But when it came time to write music for someone else, you're helping a director put together an entire piece. And one of the initial things that I had to get over is that, when you're a performer, you don't perform in little bits. And what I mean by that, you don't do an introduction and then 10 minutes later come by and do something else. Well, these guys, when they make movies, you're always shooting out a sequence. Right. You know what I mean? But then you put it together, then all of a sudden it looks like there's this arc of a story. So one of the things first thing that was hard for me to really grasp as to how to help maximize that, right? And a friend of mine who's my mentor in the business, Miles Goodman, God rest his soul, was the one who really helped me chart it out on paper, and we would look at scenes, and then all of a sudden you start to build a score based on how the arc of the film would develop. Now I don't have to do that now. I've been doing it so long. I don't have to really do that. I'm accustomed to it now. But back then that was a big deal for me, trying to do that, because I was coming from a place where you got on stage, you started your performance, you went from beginning to end, and that was it. Right. And the other thing too, back then, I used to always try to put an ending on every scene. Not understanding that this scene is connected to 3 other scenes, and it doesn't really culminate until it gets to the 5th scene. You know what I mean? So that thinking in those terms, really was something that I had to learn, and it's had a reverse effect. It really had an effect on how I deal with my live shows with my band. Understanding what that arc is. I'm not one to try to come out and talk in between every tune. That's really not my thing. It's like I like playing a bit and then I talk in the middle and then play a bit more, and then, because I think the music is the thing that has to tell a story, like a film, just like a film.
And now, Sacha, maybe in sort of reverse or related to that, you're a filmmaker and a documentarian, and you have focused so much on these musical cultures and these movements and these musicians. Does your work as a filmmaker and your visual work, does it grow out of the listening to the music? Is it suggested and shaped by the music itself?
Well, I was a music journalist before this, and
Right.
there's just so much information in music that you can unpack. I mean, you can interview someone and get great information, but there's so much written in between the lines of music that just fills so much of a void of what's missing. And so, again, I think music, particularly with Black folks, is a marker of particular times, but there are consistencies throughout all those times, and through listening to music, you can bring them all together in interesting ways.
And thank you for that little plug about music journalism. Because
Does anyone remember that?
Well, does anyone we met in a fellowship for music arts journalists that no longer exists. And there are one thing I love, the many things I love about this film. One is that in the appreciation of any artist or a musician in our culture, there are stories to tell. You have to. So I've been lucky to be close to Terence over decades, and there's an arc of these stories. The opera didn't just happen. This opera that you will maybe see, Champion, there's a long arc of what happened to Terence Blanchard as a musician, as a composer, but also as a human being, to have the empathy and compassion to tell a very difficult story.
Well, but that's the thing about Sacha doing this that makes it important. You watch this and it just makes so much sense, right? This documentary. But you have to understand that this documentary could have been something totally different in the hands of somebody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's why my hat goes off to him for doing this the way that he did it. He saw the real Louis Armstrong, and put it, because you know, when the thought that came to my mind when we said, you know, we see the Hello Dolly and we don't know the other stuff, and the thought that comes to my mind is why? Why don't we see the other stuff? But we see the Hello Dolly stuff. You know, so then there's that whole conspiracy theory thing. I don't want to go down that road. But you have to ask yourself, why is that image always propped up more so than the other ones? You know what I mean?
Well, we can, you know,
Huh?
there's a reason.
Of course, of course. So that's why Sacha, a person like him, is extremely important because he understands this medium, you know, he understands the caveats in it. And let me tell you something, putting this together is not easy. It's not easy because there's a lot of stuff you got to look at, and then you have to kind of figure out a chronological order, and then you have to create a story behind it that'll keep you engaged in what it is that you're experiencing. You know what I mean?
Our editors also are fantastic. Jason Pollard, for one, who's son of Sam Pollard. So I had a great rapport with the editors. But really, there weren't people like me 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, in the position to make these kinds of films. And there are things that I'm going to focus on that someone else might not. And ultimately, Louis Armstrong is an American. I'm an American. I'm an American filmmaker. I make films for Americans. But primarily, I first start with the community first. Because if the community understands what the film is about, then it's going to resonate with everyone else. And it has to speak to them first. Or else it's not really going to be effective. And just hearing his voice in conversations, like, I never perceived him to speak the way that he does in real life. You know, he's Hello Dolly. You figure everything is prim and proper, but it's like he's a real person. And hearing his voice definitely, I feel, helps people understand who he really was.
And hearing his frustration in his voice at times. You know, I mean, because we viewed Pops as always this happy-go-lucky dude, you know, but man, he was a human being. He was hurt by the same things that all of us were hurt by, you know, and to hear him vocalize that in a way that I recognize, where I recognize the hurt in that sound. You know, I recognize the pain in the way he's saying it, you know, just humanizes him in a way that I can't describe, you know. So again, think about it. This footage has been around.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing to me is that it's not the archives and the material that you dealt with, that was there. People have written books about Louis Armstrong. People have done projects told Louis Armstrong's story, and that material was there, and they chose not to
do it, exactly.
Do what you did and tease out what you teased out, which to me makes it all the more remarkable. I love what you said about the community you do at one point zoom in on that great photo, the famous one of Armstrong on the stoop with the kids all around him, which was part of his life. But then at the end, when he passes, you have all these accolades, but then one of his neighbors is like, yeah, it was a man on the street. Right. It was just another guy. And he managed to be both at one time.
I mean, he's living in Corona. He could have lived in Chelsea. He could have lived anywhere. But he's living in working class Corona.
For 43 years he lived there. Yeah. When he came up the road. There's a lot was suppressed, as we said, about Armstrong. It has been told that, around the time of segregation and black girls being forbidden to show up in school in Arkansas, Armstrong was very outspoken for one moment, the way that my president feels, the way it treats black people in this country and go to hell. I couldn't help but think about that in 2006, 2007, Terence, when in the wake of a flood that resulted from neglect and in the wake of lots more neglect, after that, you were outspoken with both your music and your words. And since, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I've seen this development of a political and social purpose in your art.
Well, I mean, listen, man, when you see these great musicians and you hear the stories of them being run out of town not being able to stay in a hotel, having to sleep on the bus, just to play music, right? How could I not be? How could I not be? Being a kid who came along as a result of their struggles, having the privilege of going on tour, staying in hotels, not even thinking twice about it, right? But to hear and I'm closely related to them where they feel the need to pass that information on, you know? So, of course, and then one of the moments in this film that I love is when Pops, I think it was Chicago he got to, and it was cold, and he bought coal for people and just told them to come
Baltimore,
and get it.
yeah.
It was Baltimore?
Yeah.
He said, just come and get it. Come take what you need. Right. How many celebrities we see doing that?
Yeah. At the height of the Depression.
Man, that man had a certain level of compassion and a conscience where he was sitting down and saying, you know, okay, I'm in this position, but if I'm gonna be in this position, I should be able to help other people. Let me go ahead and do that. You know, that's another lesson for me, because it's not just about stardom. It's not just about playing a concert. You know, like he said, we start with the community, right? If you're not taking care of your own community, it doesn't make a difference. So when it came time to do the Katrina thing, man, frankly, that stuff pissed me off, to see people look like me called refugees. Right. I get angry now just thinking about it. You know what I mean? And I'm like, how dare you? Anybody else would be somebody who was a person in need. But because they look like me, we're refugees? Right. And that's what, you're gonna try to demean us to that point? No, that's not gonna go down in terms of us being able to have a voice and say something about it. It's the same thing now, you know, with the new band that I have. You know, we've been talking about gun violence, you know, all the time. You know, because back when the other guy was in office, we talked about him more than people getting shot. And it's a serious thing. You see it still happening. You know what I mean? And it's something that we have to really address, that we're not addressing because we're allowing all of this misinformation to get out there. So something like this documentary, bro, just fuels me to understand that, no, okay, I may be blessed to have this career, you know, but I have this career for a reason. Right. You know what I'm saying? He has his talent for a reason, right? And you have to recognize that and take care of that and nurture it, because just as quickly as we got it, it could be taken away. You know what I mean? So I value this a great deal. Every time I see it, you know, I get pumped, you know, because I think about, he didn't have to do that. People were just excited about seeing Louis Armstrong perform anywhere, right? That was enough for them, right? But it wasn't enough for him. You see, and that's the thing that's important. That should be the lesson for a lot of young artists today, you know, because a lot of young artists today get paid and they go about their way with their money.
And I agree. And in a way, like, I wrote about this for Daily Beast, partly because it's a political website. And I see this film as in some ways being political, but really it's more, Sacha, what you said before, community. Like, what you're doing is by, of, and for a community. And if you don't, you know, what purpose will it serve? How can it serve?
Well, when you go back to, you know, the perception of Armstrong during his day and, you know, these black celebrities coming out against him in the media, I mean, it's, you know, it makes sense for there to be people not on the same page. You know, I mean, this is a very old program, old playbook.
The old playbook
that doesn't stop.
Still in use.
You know, so we try to learn. You know, we try to look at history. I feel like history. I mean, look at what's going on in Florida. It's like they're trying to steal your identity. They're trying to steal who you are. And the minute you lose that, it's game over. They don't want you to know who you are. I mean, this is it's not just black history. It's American history. Right. And it's just like you just want to ignore a particular portion of American history. It's insane.
I agree. I've learned a lot, especially writing in New Orleans, about the idea of erasure of history. It's very easy to do once it's gone.
And look, man, let me just add something to that. There's so much American history that even as African Americans, we don't know. And it's not just about African Americans. It's about all different types of people.
Right.
I worked on this one documentary, man. It was talking about, of course, we just totally forget about Native Americans. You know, we just kind of write them off, which is a shame, you know. But then you look at all of the other people who have had struggles in this country, and that's the American tale. That's the American tale nobody wants to tell. They want to have this pie in the sky and, you know, free land of the free and the brave. We know that's not true, right? And this thing is a pure example of that. Because on the one hand, here you have this man who played that game to perfection, right? To become one of the most popular faces on the planet. Think about him, a man who looked like him on the screen with
Barbra Streisand.
Barbra Streisand. That wouldn't happen. You know what I mean? So I mean, on the one hand, when I saw it at first, I took it out of context. But when I look at it now, that was one of the biggest baller moves you could ever make.
Absolutely.
But you understand what I'm saying? You have to do something to rise to that occasion in this country, because they're not going to give any person of color that kind of gravitas just because they like him. Mm-hmm. You have to bring the product. The product was the music. Right. Like I said, that scene that for me is one of my favorites, and I'm glad he put it in there. You did it beautifully, because there's just like a little short thing, but it's the one with Danny Kaye, right? And what people don't get about that scene is Danny Kaye can't keep up.
No.
But it happens for a split second.
Yeah.
Right?
No one really could.
Right.
All right, so I've made a solemn promise that at a certain point I would open it up to questions. And so, do we have any questions for Terence or Sacha?
We need to turn the lights up. I
see a hand right in the front, so that's easy to see.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Diana Campbell at Talk with Diana TV show. Hi, Terence and Sacha.
Hello.
Mr. Blumenfeld, thank you. Terence, I wanted to ask you, I also lived in New Orleans, and I'm quite sure your parents know me. You were a little boy when I was there, okay? Doing this documentary, also to you, Sacha, how long did it take you to make the documentary, and what gave you the incentive to make it?
They had done research about 2 years before I got to it. Mm-hmm. The incentive was they called me, and I said yes. Thankfully, it's the best decision I made, and it took us about 1.5 years to get it done.
Okay. Terence, because you lived in New Orleans, and Louis Armstrong lived there, was very important there. What effects did that have on you playing your music, especially with the sax?
Well, like I said, you know, his impact musically is still being felt. Those kids are playing those ideas and don't really understand it. But I think in terms of doing this documentary, one of the things we've never talked about, and I think people should realize, he called me to do this documentary right around the same time, a little bit after the mayor was taking down all the Confederate statues in New Orleans, right? So I looked at it as a moment in time, like, no, things are changing. And it's, you know, sometimes in life, we always go, when will they, why don't they, you know, and one guy told me, he said, listen, man, if God put the question in your brain, you may be the person to deal with it. So when he calls me to do this, and I'm looking at all of that stuff go down as well, I jump at the chance for this. Because I like I said, I look at it as an opportunity for me to tell Pops thank you after being misguided about what his contribution was to the world of music for so long.
Do we have time for 1 or 2 more questions? All right. I'm going to why don't we get someone from back there? And while you're doing that, you know, I talked to Terence right after they removed those monuments, and what you told me then was it's like a weight was lifted that I never knew was there.
Yeah, there was this Beauregard monument that I used to drive by all the time, and man, we were waiting for that thing to come down, and it took them forever. And the sad part about it was those guys that took the stuff down, they were firemen who had to wear masks, bulletproof vests, and helmets, you know, because of the threats that they were under. And when that thing finally came off, the reaction was something I didn't expect. I didn't expect to have that reaction. I'm like, wow, I felt lighter, you know?
Do we have another question?
Yeah.
Yes, my question is for Sasha. I'm curious about your decision in the filmmaking of itself. Like you had a lot of folks that you did a voiceover as opposed to cutting to certain folks that spoke. And I just wanted to know your decision as to not bring it on as far as a visual and just have it as the voiceover.
I think when you have Armstrong himself, his voice, you want to stay focused on that. You know, how many documentaries have you seen where someone's sitting in a chair reminiscing about a guy that they didn't even know? I mean, most of the people in the film knew him. Yeah, I wanted to get people at the time of when it happened, and it felt like it was a more effective choice to use voices instead of seeing people and take you out of what's happening.
Cool. Can we do one more? Find someone back there. God bless you for freeing us from the talking heads.
I mean, I've got other ones that will have some talking heads, but try to do something different here and there.
Do we have another question coming?
Okay. Hello. I'm a composer at Juilliard, and I have a question for Mr. Blanchard. You mentioned earlier that in Black music we don't necessarily have genres. So how did you apply, your experience as a Black musician to the classical sphere?
Well, it's like, my composition teacher, the way Roger Dickinson, the way he taught me is like, he taught me that all of these things are DNA that could be malleable, right? So when you look at The Rite of Spring, what is it? It's based off of Hungarian folklore. But Stravinsky, as a composer, knew how to take that DNA and build something bigger from it. So that's the way that I was taught. I was taught to look at something like, there was another guy, his name was Hale Smith, another great Black composer who I studied with after Roger. And when he listened to something that I'd written, he told me, he said, sound like you were trying to control this amount of space without having the ability to control this amount of space, right? And what that meant to me was, okay, being able to take that idea, seeing all the permutations that can come from that idea, and then everything spring from that idea. And what's the best example of that most people know in the world? Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, right? So as soon as I say that to you, you go, oh, I get it, right? But music has really evolved over the course of generations with just that ability to do that. So for me, it's like, what is the DNA? That harmony from Old Rocking Chair. But you don't recognize it as that because I'm not using it the way that they used it, right? But it's there. And the thing is to take it out of the realm of the jazz, the typical jazz ensemble with horns and a rhythm section in the back, but put strings there. And the strings are not playing a typical melody, right? I have this just beat-a, because I didn't want to take away from anything that Pops did. So there's no need for me to write a whole bunch of notes, right? Because then that would be distracting, right? But I needed something like sentimental. But the sentiment comes from those two notes, then the DNA comes from that harmony. So as a composer, what you need to do is always look at the DNA information that you have around you. It could come from anything. It could be a rhythm, it could be harmony, it could be melody. Take the melody, flip it around, turn it backwards, right? There's one piece that we play with my band. The piano player finally realized that the bridge is the melody in retrograde. Or there's one tune that I recorded with Dr. Cornel West. It's called Choices, right? The whole entire introduction is the same chord changes but played backwards, right? So these ideas are all over the place. And once you learn to have those tools that allow you to see other possibilities, man, the world becomes infinite, the number of things that you can do. Then it's just a matter of making choices.
Thank you.
If I may, I just want to speak to part of that question for a minute because, Louis Armstrong was one of a long lineage of musicians who said they didn't really want to deal with that word jazz. Right. And sometimes when I'm around students, they ask about it. Is this jazz? Is this classical music? Is this world music? And I'm like, whenever you hear those terms, you got to think about who named something that term. Usually they want to name, own, and then sell. And that's the purpose of those words. So if you can, it's very good for marketing, not good for art.
Right.
Can we do one more? We can't do one more. Well, then.
I'm sorry, man. I was trying to get to you in the back. Yeah.
All right. Please help me thank Sacha Jenkins and Terence Blanchard.